I'm Rosemary. I sat in the courtroom, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The judge held a thick manila envelope, the court seal unbroken. His eyes scanned the label, then he looked at my sister, Erin, sitting across the room with a practiced air of concern. Next, his gaze fell on my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, sitting shoulder to shoulder behind their attorney. Finally, he turned to me. Do they have any idea what's in here? His voice was calm, but there was a hint of underlying caution. I met his eyes and nodded slowly, just once. What followed was an 11-minute drama. The bailiff shifted from one foot to the other twice. Erin let out a scream so loud that the clerk flinched in surprise. My mother gripped the armrest until her hands were as white as chalk, and my father stared blankly at the floor, just as he had done for the past decade. But this courtroom scene was just the climax of a story that began over a decade ago. I lived in a small coastal town, working as a registered nurse at the local community health center. I was a fresh-faced 24-year-old on one fateful Tuesday night in March. That night, after a grueling 12-hour shift, I was exhausted. I could still smell the antiseptic on my scrubs and felt the weight of the patient's pain on my shoulders. I pulled into my driveway just after 11:15. The porch light was on, as it always was. I loved that small rental house near the beach. It was my little corner of the world. The illuminated porch was the first thing I noticed, and then, in the center of the welcome mat, a baby carrier. It was an infant car seat with pale yellow padding, and a soft lavender blanket was wrapped snugly around a tiny, breathing bundle. I dropped my bag and quickly knelt down. The baby was fast asleep, perhaps 2 weeks old, with tiny fists curled up near her chin and blotchy, brand new skin. As a nurse, checking vitals was second nature. I pressed 2 fingers gently to her chest and watched for the rhythm of her breathing. It was steady, and she felt warm, as if she'd been fed recently. Then, I saw the note. It was folded once and tucked between the handle and the padding of the carrier. Lined notebook paper, torn at the edge. I recognized Erin's handwriting immediately, the same loopy cursive she used on the few birthday cards she ever sent. Her name is Ava. I can't do this. Don't look for me. That was all it said. No explanations, no apologies, just a name and an instruction. I looked up and down the quiet street. There were a few porch lights on in neighboring houses, but there was no sign of movement. Erin's car was long gone. I had no idea how long she'd been there. It could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. I gently scooped Ava out of the carrier and held her close to my chest. She stirred slightly but didn't wake up. With my free hand, I called 911 and then tried to reach my parents. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail at 3 o'clock in the morning. I called twice more without answer. Finally, on the 4th try, my father picked up, his voice thick with sleep. I told him everything, the carrier, the note, and the baby. There was a long silence on the other end before he mumbled, "I'll talk to your mother," and hung up. By sunrise, I'd fed Ava formula from a can I bought at the all-night convenience store. Still in my scrubs, I stood at the checkout counter with the baby in the carrier, ignoring the strange looks from the cashier. At 8 o'clock, I drove to my parents' house. It was a large 2-story house near the center of town, with a beautiful garden that my mother loved to tend. When I knocked on the door with Ava in my arms, my father opened it. He looked like he wanted to let me in, but then my mother appeared behind him, her arms crossed and a cold look on her face. "Your sister made her choice," she said flatly. "We warned her about David. We told her he was no good. She didn't listen. Mom, this is a baby. She needs." I started to say, but she cut me off. "She's your burden now. Erin made her mess, and we're not cleaning it up." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I looked at my father, his hand on the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. His mouth opened, then closed, and he said nothing. My mother shut the door in my face. I stood there on the porch for a full minute, holding Ava close. Then I turned around and walked back to the car. As I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, I made two decisions. I would call Child Protective Services, and I would ask them to place Ava with me. The next afternoon, a social worker named Miss Harris arrived. She was in her late 40s, with practical shoes and a thick clipboard filled with forms. She walked through my small but clean apartment, checking the smoke detectors, the locks, and the water temperature. When she asked where the baby would sleep, I showed her the second bedroom, which was empty except for a dresser and an old fan. I can get a crib by tomorrow, I told her. A co-worker has one in storage. Ms. Harris nodded and made a note. You're employed full-time? She asked. Registered nurse at the community health center, I replied. She asked about Ava's mother, and I told her that I had no idea where Erin was and that her phone was disconnected. Ms. Harris explained the kinship placement process. Ava could stay with me while CPS investigated. If Erin didn't resurface and no other family stepped forward, we could move towards formal guardianship. That evening, I signed the temporary placement papers with Ava in a borrowed bassinet beside the kitchen table. The first week was a blur of chaos and adjustment. I called my supervisor, Dr. Lewis, and asked to switch from night shifts to days. She was incredibly understanding and told me to take all the time I needed. I had to make some tough financial decisions. I canceled my gym membership, stopped eating out, and gave up my streaming services. Formula and diapers became the top items on my budget spreadsheet. My new routine revolved around 5 a.m. Coffee in the dark, with Ava in the crook of my arm. The kitchen smelled like coffee and baby formula. I quickly learned to do everything one-handed, pouring coffee, checking my phone, and folding burp cloths. As Ava grew, she reached her milestones. She smiled at 6 weeks, rolled over at 4 months, and at 9 months, she made a sound that was almost like mama. I pretended it counted, even though it might have been just a random noise. By her first birthday, we had a rhythm. I worked morning shifts at the clinic, and Ava went to the daycare center a few blocks away. I'd pick her up at 4 o'clock, make dinner, give her a bath, read her a book, and then put her to bed. Dr. Lewis brought over bags of clothes her own daughter had outgrown, and the nurses at the clinic threw me a late baby shower in the break room. It was a simple celebration, with a cake from the local bakery and a stack of baby onesies. One of the gifts, a gift card to a children's store, made me cry in the bathroom after everyone had gone back to their patients. I sent monthly emails to my parents, including a photo of Ava and an invitation for them to visit. I wrote the same thing every time, here's Ava this month. She's healthy and growing. You're welcome to visit any time. My mother never responded, not even once. My father replied only once, in the 7th month, simply saying, she looks healthy. After that, there was nothing. I tried to find Erin. I called her old number, which was disconnected. I searched social media, asked our mutual friends from high school, and even checked with the sheriff's office. They filed a missing person report, but Erin was an adult who'd left voluntarily, and there was no sign of foul play. She was gone. When Ava was a year old, I decided to file for temporary legal guardianship. I hired a family law attorney named Mr. Carter. After hearing my story, he took my case at a reduced rate. He told me something that I've always remembered: document everything. You never know when the people who weren't there will try to rewrite the story. The guardianship hearing was held in the county courthouse. It was a small, stuffy room with wooden paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed whenever the heating system kicked on. Mr. Carter stood beside me, and Ava was in her carrier on the bench, gnawing on a teething ring. Erin had been served by publication in the local newspaper, but she didn't respond or show up. My parents were notified through their attorney, and my mother sent a letter stating that they did not oppose guardianship but requested no further contact regarding this matter. The judge, a young man with glasses, paused on that last line. No further contact. Is the respondent's mother aware she's relinquishing involvement? He asked. She is, Your Honor, Mr. Carter replied. The letter speaks for itself. The judge signed the order, granting me temporary legal guardianship of Ava. In the hallway, Mr. Carter put his hand on my shoulder and said, This is just the first step. I carried Ava out of the courthouse into the warm March sunlight. As I sat in the parking lot with the engine running and Ava asleep in the back seat, I felt a sense of responsibility that was both heavy and profound. I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and headed to the grocery store because we were out of milk. Over the next few years, not much had changed in terms of my parents' attitude. I still sent monthly emails, updating them on Ava's second Christmas, her first day at preschool, and the time she fell and needed stitches above her eye. I counted those emails later, there were 96 of them in total over 8 years. My mother never replied, and my father sent a Christmas card in the second year. A store bought one with a picture of a snowman, signed simply Dad in blue ink. After that, there was nothing. Aaron resurfaced once, when Ava was 2 years old. I got a call late at night, a local area code. It was her. Her voice was the same, light and slightly rushed, as if she was always in a hurry to leave. She didn't ask about Ava but instead asked if I could wire her $300 for a security deposit. Do you want to know about your daughter? I asked. There was a 5-second silence on the line, and then she hung up. She called again the following year, asking for $500 for rent. This time, I asked her directly, Aaron, she's walking and talking, and she asks about you. Do you want to see her? Her voice turned sharp. You owe me. You have my kid. I didn't raise my voice. She's not leverage, Aaron. She's a child. And with that, she hung up again. Since our state is a one-party consent state, I recorded both calls, just as Mr. Carter had advised. I logged the dates, times, duration, and summaries in a spreadsheet. It was clear that Aaron knew where Ava was, knew how to reach me, but only contacted me when she needed money. When Ava was 3, Mr. Carter filed a petition for the involuntary termination of Aaron's parental rights. According to our state law, a parent who fails to have meaningful contact, provide support, or attempt to resume parenting for 6 consecutive months can have their parental rights terminated. Aaron had provided none of these things for 3 years. The hearing was brief. The judge reviewed the CPS records, my guardianship file, and Aaron's failure to respond. He terminated her parental rights effective immediately. Adoption proceedings followed soon after. Mr. Carter handled the paperwork, and when we went to the courthouse for the finalization hearing, the judge, a kind-looking woman with silver hair, asked Ava if she knew what was happening. Mama said I'm getting adopted, Ava replied, holding my hand tightly. The judge smiled and signed the adoption decree. The records were sealed, and I was officially Ava's legal adoptive mother. Walking out of the courthouse, Ava pointed at the flagpole in front of the building. That's a big flag, Mama, she said. It is, I replied. That night, as always, the porch light was on when we got home. It had become a comforting habit, a reminder of the night I found her. Ava pressed her nose against the screen door and said, Light on, Mama. Light on, I echoed back. I thought the hard part was over. I had done everything right, every document filed, every late night shift worked, every tear wiped. I thought I'd finally earned some peace. But then, when Ava was 7, a letter arrived one Wednesday afternoon. It was from a man named Jake. He was a carpenter who lived in a neighboring town. In his letter, he explained that he'd dated Erin briefly 8 years ago before she disappeared. He had no idea that she was pregnant and only found out about Ava when a mutual acquaintance saw a photo of Ava at a school event and noticed the resemblance. I called Mr. Carter right away. He assured me that Jake had no legal standing since the adoption was final. But he also said that if I wanted to let Jake into Ava's life, it was my choice. I thought about it for a week and then decided to call Jake. We met at a small diner halfway between our towns. He was a big, gentle-looking man in his 30s, with calloused hands and a quiet way of speaking. He brought a photo of himself at Ava's age, and the resemblance was striking. We agreed to a DNA test, and the results came back in 10 days. Jake was Ava's biological father. He didn't celebrate or cry, he just sat across from me and said, "I missed everything. I want to do right by her." We set some ground rules for supervised visits once a month. He'd meet Ava as Mr. Jake, and there would be no pressure on the word father unless Ava chose to use it. Jake agreed to all the conditions without any argument. True to his word, Jake showed up. Every first Saturday of the month, rain or shine, he'd park his work truck in my driveway. He brought Ava books about woodworking and how buildings were constructed. She loved these books and peppered him with questions about whether you could build a tree house that was also a playroom. With enough wood, yeah, he'd reply. He was always respectful around me, never overstepping or staying too long. After 4 months, I let him take Ava to the park under supervision. After 8 months, she showed him her report card, and he framed it in his workshop. Over the course of a year, Jake's business grew. He hired a second crew, bought a new saw, and got contracts with a few local developers. He still lived simply but started saving for Ava's future. One afternoon, as we sat on my porch while Ava played in the yard, Jake told me what he'd done. "I set up a trust," he said. "An education fund for Ava. $80,000 to start, and I've named her as the beneficiary of my life insurance." I stared at him in surprise. He just kept looking straight ahead, watching Ava chase a butterfly. "I missed her first 7 years," he said. "I can't get those back, but I can make sure she's taken care of no matter what happens to me." He'd named me as the sole trustee of the trust, not Aaron, not my parents, but me. His lawyer had drawn up all the necessary papers, and Jake had also written a notarized affidavit stating that Aaron had abandoned Ava, that I had been the sole caregiver, and that under no circumstances should the trust be transferred to anyone else. 6 months after setting up the trust, Jake mentioned that he'd been having some chest tightness during one of his visits. As a nurse, I was immediately concerned. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Couple of weeks." "Probably just the stress of work," he brushed it off, like most men in their 30s did when it came to doctor's appointments. 3 weeks later, I got a call at 7 o'clock in the morning from Jake's business partner. Jake had collapsed on a job site. It was a massive heart attack. The paramedics worked on him for 22 minutes, but he was only 35 years old. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone, as Jake's partner apologized for calling so early. Ava was in the kitchen, eating cereal. I could hear the spoon clinking against the bowl. I told Ava about Jake after school. She sat on the couch, her backpack still on, and cried silently. She'd only known him for a short time, but Jake had shown up for her in a way that made those months feel like a lifetime. The probate process took almost a year to settle. Jake's estate, his business assets, life insurance, personal savings, and the education trust he'd started. In the end, the total value of the trust, after probate, life insurance payout, and final contributions, was $278,400. I was confirmed as the sole trustee, and everything went through Mr. Carter's office. Jake's obituary ran in the local newspaper. The last line read, "Survived by a daughter, Ava." Those words made me feel both grateful and heartbroken at the same time. I didn't know that others were reading them too. The weeks after Jake's death were quiet and filled with grief. Ava was still going to school and doing her homework, but there was a spark missing from her. She slept with the lavender blanket that she'd been wrapped in the night Aaron left her on my porch every night. It was threadbare now, with 2 patches I'd sewn on, one with a scrap of pillow case fabric and the other with iron-on tape from the craft store. She didn't care that the patches didn't match, it was her security blanket. One night, she climbed into my bed, something she hadn't done since she was 6. She pressed her back against mine and